That's how it worked. Brown gets one squirt, keeps going on up the ridge, and even though he was officially, he never claimed, but was even though he never claimed the victory over von Richthofen, he was officially credited with it. But anyway, based on everything that a lot of people who know a lot more about this than I do know, May keeps going along the river edge here, von Richthofen right behind him, headed toward the town of Vaux. Now, witnesses say that there were a couple things of interest, that May was flying very erratically, and gee, I wonder why, and that von Richthofen was firing in extremely short bursts. And a couple people noticed that von Richthofen, he would fire a couple of bursts and he would lean forward and have to recharge his guns. Reason for that was that the left gun had a double feed, the right gun had a broken firing pin. Now, the problem and the great mistake that von Richthofen made is that once they were here, they were behind enemy lines. And all along this river, basically, were Australian troops. So anyway, they're zipping along and they're coming up on the village of Vaux. And May talked about at one point being so low, he was afraid that either his propeller or his wheels had actually hit the water of the Somme River. They're coming up on the village of Vaux. Now, this is the church at Vaux. This road here continues along the Somme River. This one goes up the hill to Maricourt-l'Abbé. This is not a big church, okay? This is a small village. It's a small town. It's a small church. May said he flew around the steeple, and von Richthofen basically followed him around the steeple. So we're talking maybe, 25 feet? So anyway, they miss the church at Vaux and keep heading basically along the riverbank and up the ridge. Okay, ignore the tourist who got in my picture here and his Red Baron shirt. So they're coming up on the place in the Somme River where the river turns basically northwest, I believe. At this point, they're a couple of miles behind Allied lines. On this ridge up here is a machine gun on a post, a belt-fed Vickers machine gun, manned by the section sergeant from Australia, a man by the name of Cedric Popkin. His primary job was to secure a pontoon bridge which crossed the river, because remember, the lines were on both sides of the river here. So he sees them coming along, and they're flying literally below him at this point. And he gets a shot off, but the planes keep flying. They go by him, and they go up this ridge. Now, on the other side of this ridge is the artillery emplacement that von Richthofen's second objective for the mission was to find. That artillery emplacement is protected by two post-mounted drum-fed Lewis machine guns that happen to be manned by the company cooks, Gunners Bowie and Evans. You know, the Aussies can do anything if they put their mind to it. Now, they have a front-on shot on von Richthofen when and of course, a lot of things are happening at the same time here, folks. The whole thing from pillar to post is a very short event. But anyway, May coming along here, knowing he's going to have to climb the ridge, knowing he's basically going to climb in front of von Richthofen's guns, knows it's it. He's done. But he has no choice. He starts climbing the ridge. Von Richthofen gets over the ridge, and a number of things happen at once. His firing pin gives up the ghost completely, and he starts hearing, and he's probably starting to feel ground fire hit his airplane because a lot of people are shooting at him. He comes over the ridge, and he makes a U-turn. Of course, you've got Bowie and Evans on the other side, and you've got Popkin over here waiting for him to turn around. And he gets about right here in this gap of the trees, and the witnesses said the plane suddenly rears up. And a great analogy I've heard is someone saying, pretend you're flying a plane, then out of nowhere somebody leans over and punches you in the ribs. Plane noses up, comes down, makes a left turn, and starts to go down. Now, it's not spinning. It's not out of control, but it's coming down in a very flat attitude. Remember, the plane had a lot of lift. Plane comes down in this field, which is, this is the gap in the trees. Plane comes down and pancakes in this field, which at that time was a beet field. And this area here was, and the chimney stack is still there, a brick factory. This was called the St. Colette Brick Factory. Plane pancakes, hits here, takes a bounce, and comes to rest against a sugar beet pile where they put sugar beets under dirt to cure them, I guess. Comes to rest, cloud of dust, and there was an observation. Since this was up on the ridge, there were a couple of observation trenches there, and a couple of soldiers run over, and Manfred von Richthofen is actually dead. This is again a sign they have at the crash site describing it. This tree area was actually a chalk quarry at the time, and if you see actual aerial photographs of the ridge, it's just this big white blob in the middle of the ridge. Von Richthofen's body and airplane were recovered and actually brought back, for, ironically enough, not the 209 Squadron, but to the airfield of the Observation Squadron 3AFC, which happened to be on an adjoining field. And I've been most of the places that we've seen here. And I've been to 209 Squadron's field, and I've been to 3AFC's field. They're across the hedge from each other. They basically had lifted the plane out because the undercarriage had splayed out, as you see here, got it on a truck and brought up a truck to and taken von Richthofen's body back to their squadron. This is actually one of their hangar tents, and the triplane is behind it. Now, the plane was not shot up this bad. This is all souveniring. Okay. Basically, the undercarriage was splayed, and the bottom, I think, left wing was crumpled, but the plane was relatively intact. Oh, when they got to the airplane and they looked in the cockpit, fuel valve was shut, the magneto was off. So even though he had been severely wounded, and I'll tell you how bad it was in a minute, he executed basically what was an emergency landing. A couple of comments on this picture. This engine is in the Imperial War Museum in Elephant and Castle in London. This seat is in a place called the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto. The top wing cross from, I think, the left wing or either the tail for years was owned by the Canadian ace Billy Bishop. I don't know what since happened to it. And of course, as you can see, struts, you know, they didn't have any wires, struts, fabric. And if you look on eBay, you can probably buy enough authentic von Richthofen DR1 fabric to cover yourself 3 or 4 DR1s if you're so inclined. And as I said, von Richthofen's remains were removed to a hangar at 3AFC Squadron. This picture was taken of von Richthofen along with pictures of his funeral and basically dropped over German lines the evening he was buried, which was April 22nd. Now, I think they took this picture was not published, and it was not really exploited in any way, but I think it was a testament to something of the chivalry of the times that they were going to show proof that he had been killed, and they delivered that proof basically at the doorstep of their enemies. Von Richthofen was examined twice by General Staff officers of the Royal Army Medical Corps, and he died from one bullet that entered his body under his right armpit, traversed across his chest, hit his spine, caromed out, and came out under his left pectoral muscle. How he lived long enough to even get the plane on the ground is amazing to me because of it was a very, very serious wound. Von Richthofen was buried with full military honors by the Australians in the local village cemetery at the closest village, which was Bertangle. Again, a sign outside of the village cemetery, an actual picture from his burial. I've been here. The question remains, of course, who got him? Now, there are 3 people who had what I would consider a really good chance. One of them was Roy Brown, but the problem with Roy Brown is Roy Brown attacked from the left. Von Richthofen was clearly wounded from the right. There's Bowie and Evans, the 2 cooks. They never really had a 90-degree angle shot at him. They had a frontal shot. They had an oblique. There's a small window of opportunity, but I don't know. So we go back to Sergeant Popkin, the man guarding the pontoon bridge. When von Richthofen did his U-turn and completed the turn before he executed his emergency landing, at that point, Popkin was looking at him at right angles. He had a belt-fed Vickers machine gun. He was an expert gunner. He was the section chief, and you've got a guy with a lot of ammunition at a very doable range for a machine gunner, 400 yards. He knew what he was doing. Most everybody, and there's been 3 experts who've done exhaustive research on this. Floyd Gibbons in the 30s, Pat Carousel in the 60s, and one of our members, Norman Franks, an Englishman, in the 90s. And they've all come up basically with, under normal probability, the man who probably killed the Red Baron was probably Sergeant Popkin. Now, could it have been a random Australian soldier with a .303 rifle? It could be. You just don't know. Now, we have a good idea of what happened on April the 21st, but the thing we really don't know remains, why did it happen? Why did von Richthofen break his own rules by pursuing for too long, flying too low, several miles behind enemy lines, and most importantly, failing to maintain his greatest advantage as a fighter pilot, situational awareness? A couple of factors that could have contributed. He'd been in this area for less than 2 weeks. Also, and of that 2 weeks, there were several days that weren't flyable, so he may have only had a half a dozen or so operational flights over that section of the Somme. He, as I said earlier, he had been flying for almost 2 years, sometimes as many as 5 times a day, and was very likely experiencing some form of PTSD. Plus, he had the head wound, which he himself said, gave him debilitating headaches, and many times he would come from a mission, just go straight to bed and lay there until it was time to get up and fly again. That fact being said, and the fact that he still flew all these missions, and with all these factors, I think gives us the best insight into the deep, unwavering sense of duty that I think was really his driving force as a fighter pilot. Now, this is kind of a footnote to this. One of the great pleasures of studying history is that you not only get to look back on events and study them, but you also get to examine their consequences. A few weeks before he died, von Richthofen gave a sealed envelope to his group adjutant, Karl Bodenschatz, and says, if I don't come back, open this. And so on April the 22nd, when it was clear that von Richthofen had been shot down and killed, Bodenschatz opened the envelope.